Hello, everyone, and welcome. As promised, in this recording, I'm going to be speaking about my thoughts and vision about Pluto's transit into the sign of Aquarius. And maybe this is a topic that is a little bit tumultuous at the present moment, but how can it not be? Because every single astrologer has to talk about this very, very important energy shift. And also, besides, the energy of this, there is so very much other astrological energies that are in a way interconnected with this. So, of course, it is a very, very hot topic. And before I continue, I would just like to thank each and every one of you who requested this, who commented. So, thank you. And also, I would like to make this video much more, teaching rather than just predictions and, barraging you with what we can expect to happen, because much to my surprise, this is a typical case of Neptune. Much to my surprise, I only recently realized that actually most people who view my channel and my work don't really view it for the prediction or the preparation, so to speak, but rather they look at it as a teaching material. So this is absolutely wonderful, even though this comes as a huge shock to me because I'm not even a real astrologer. I am a mystic who uses astrology, but I'm not what you would call a professional astrologer. So why would anyone want to learn from me? But anyway, this doesn't matter. It honors me so very much. So let's get straight into the subject. Now, of course, you've probably heard what I'm about to say so very many times, either from me or from any other astrologer. But Pluto's ingress into the sign of Aquarius, which takes place around the 20th or 21st of January, is one of the most important energy shifts, I would like to say, this year, but also this upcoming 20 years, because roughly Pluto is going to stay in this area of the sky for the next 20 or 21 years. So this is really, really remarkable. And this, without a shadow of a doubt, brings its most immediate and most profound effect a massive ideological and perception change, and even changes, transformation, a certain kind of clarity with how we perceive, let's say, the most highest octaves of our collective understanding of the universe, of life, of each other, basically everything in existence. Because, just like Gemini is the lower perception, Gemini is, for example, how you make sense that one day of the summer is infinitely hot, where you're boiling. That is a direct perception, and because of the physical effects and everything that you experience, you analyze it, you make sense of it. That's very, very Gemini. Now we also have a very similar function, but when it comes to things which are, you know connected to our higher perceptions, because ultimately, especially in more modern times, in more modern takes of astrology, Aquarius is basically our highest mental, cerebral, and perception based understanding of basically life and the universe, and basically everything in it, and of course our connections to each other. So what we perceive through the energy and function of Aquarius, our higher mind, that may be very radically different than how we perceive existence with our lower mind, because that is where our greatest thoughts, philosophies, epiphanies, aspirations, principles, and dreams come into our sphere, and hence they come into existence one way or another. So its most immediate and most profound effect is exactly that. It opens up, it intensifies, and it kind of invites all of us to singularize, to immerse, to dive deep into these higher perceptions, higher understandings, and everything else that may affect our lives collectively and individually due to this Pluto and Aquarius energy is an indirect or maybe direct results of that. And this kind of shows us how infinitely important our higher perceptions are, because those are the tools which we actually create reality. This is the kind of principle where we think, therefore we are, but taken onto a much higher level than that. This is what we perceive, we basically make real, and especially if this is a collective energy. So, before we get into the main themes and what Pluto does in Aquarius, I would like to invite all of you to look at how Pluto functions in the signs. Now, of course, the way we study astrology, especially the predictive part, what we can expect, what is the signature configuration of certain conversations and celestial energies, is by looking back at the past, how it played out in previous cycles. Now, even though a lot of astrologers are doing this exactly with Pluto, going back many, even thousands of years to see what Pluto did, because you do need to travel back many years, because it takes Pluto 250 years plus something in this to traverse the zodiac. So, we do need to travel back in time quite a lot. But on the other hand, and this is where my personal opinion, maybe that in a certain way is futile. Why? Because a planet may have any effect it desires, and it doesn't really matter how powerful, influential, like Pluto is, if it is not in humanity's collective awareness in a very direct way. The planet's influence and how it works and its methodology and the way we can basically work with it astrologically is very much hidden, because that planet, that energy, that expression, even if it influences us, and of course it does, yet it is in the collective unconscious, not in the collective conscious. And that which is unconscious, it is meant to be a mystery. It is meant to be a divine enigma, so to speak. So maybe looking back at Pluto, what it did last time it was in Aquarius and previous cycles, is not as revelatory if we look back in our lifetimes. For example, when Pluto was in Capricorn, still actually Pluto in these few days until this 21st of January 2024, of course, is still in Capricorn. So as I'm recording this, Pluto is actually wrapping up its stay in Capricorn, even though this year towards summer, autumn, it will briefly, very briefly go back into Capricorn, but that's not, it will just touch on the 29 degrees again, but that's again like a closure. So actually, this is where its Aquarius transit is what we can expect. You know what I mean? But anyway, I know that Capricorn or even Sagittarius is radically different in Capricorn, and you might ask yourself, well, how it is relevant? Well, it is relevant because we will look at what Pluto did to the sign's expression, and we don't need to open the history book because we lived it. We lived it, and it doesn't really matter here where that Capricorn or even Sagittarius or Scorpio, but I'm not gonna go back as much, falls into your chart, because Pluto is a big out, in physical reality it's very small, but let's say it's influence wise a big outer planet. So what matters most, how it influenced all of us collectively, and the times and the era and the collective feeling, etc., etc. Now I would like to speak more about what Pluto did in Capricorn, because it is very recent, and not just recent, it's also right now still present. And we don't have to recall memories all that much going back into the deep past. This is just very fresh. And by this, we are studying how Pluto's typical methodology. Now, Pluto entered Capricorn around 2008, and it started its work there. Now, before I even evoke Pluto's effects of Capricorn, I need to go back to Pluto into Sagittarius, so pre 2008. Why? Because Pluto entered into Capricorn already charged with Sagittarian expression and Sagittarian energy. So basically, Pluto, whatever, however it transformed, modified Sagittarius, the executory part was as it entered Capricorn. It made all of that transformed, maybe not physical energy, be applicable in everyday life, in basically everything. So on one hand, we already know that it will do the same with Aquarius. So whatever it has done in Capricorn, basically, it takes that energy, the big conclusion of that energy, and it starts basically manifesting it, executing it, working with that in the sign that it enters next. So Aquarius in our case. And these signs, are basically neighbors. So of course, from an evolutionary perspective, they are interconnected as milestones, even if their expression function and everything to them is radically different from one another. Now, let me give you a concrete example. Sagittarius, let's agree that we are going to look at its legal side. It rules so very many things, but let me just give the legal example, because I finished law school, so that is a bit closer to me. While Pluto worked hard in Sagittarius, so in an era pre 2008, all throughout the world, there were very many legislation upgrades and very important trials, like cases in courts of justice. Now, the positive side, the transformation, it had to include equality and basically a certain kind of equity that is very neutral, in the sense that it is applicable to everyone, regardless of race, religion, etc., etc. Whereas the history of law, the law itself and legal systems, there were moments when they were deeply rooted in religion, moments when they were deeply discriminatory. Of course, I'm speaking about more ancient times, like ancient Greece, ancient Rome, ancient Mesopotamia, etc., etc., because those were like almost cradles of what we call law and legal system today. So, it made it very non-discriminatory, but the shadow expression, the non-discriminatory factor, turned to something totally absurd. Let me give you an example. Like, someone burned their tongue by drinking hot tea immediately after the vendor or whatever handed it to them. And they sued the company because the cup didn't have the sign caution hot, don't drink straight or whatever. Now that in itself, especially that, you know, I have legal training, it is ludicrous, it's ridiculous. This is where the law should not make an individual a vegetable. Why do you have your higher senses to figure out don't drink from the cup, and if you drank from the cup, it's not the company's fault, you're just had a you had a Mercury retrograde moment, let's say. But anyway, it doesn't matter. The shadow expression, the laws supported these technically correct, absurdly non-discriminatory expression, and it was all of us had to embrace it, agree with it, like it or not, etc., etc. But of course, Pluto's transit in Sagittarius had so very many other influences, but I'm just gonna stay with this example. Then Pluto entered Capricorn. Those laws which were refined, transformed, alchemized Pluto by revealing sides, you know, sides where the law failed, sides where the law was extremely successful, etc., etc. In Capricorn, that became executory immediately. This is where the Capricorn top-down authority, government, etc., enforced it. So people started winning certain trials, legal cases in a very ridiculous way. Pluto is the shadow side, right? So basically, people by, I'm not really sure how to word this because this is a bit opinionated, but people managed to find a way to use these legal illusions, so to speak, towards their own advantage. So you can imagine how many people fell down the stairs because it was slippery on purpose. The very, very famous car accident with the whiplash that you you couldn't really go to the hospital. You just had to go to the doctor, tell them that it hurts. He wrote on the paper whiplash. You go to the insurance company, and you know what I mean. So these elements immediately bombarded Capricorn. But what does this have to do with Capricorn? Capricorn is a top-down authority which had to enforce these and execute these and agree with these. So you imagine how a Sagittarian energy became executory in Capricorn. And you know, this is also, just remember, look back, starting from 2008 until the present moment, how radically, you know, the basically equilibrium and modus operandi of top-down authority transformed, both in a positive sense, also in rather negative sense. And I really don't need to give examples because all you need to do is just recall your memories because all of us have lived it. But let's say a positive example of how the Sagittarian energy was integrated in Capricorn and Pluto worked with that very, very powerfully. It is where in some political systems, the politicians lost immunity when they did something really wrong. You know, they still had to face trial and investigations as everyone else. Also, this is where the transparency, what happens in governments and parliaments and meetings, and how people, citizens can contest it or have a greater influence on it. That also became very, very highlighted. That became a very hot topic, so to speak. And this is where the individual could have, or at least live in the illusion, that they have a little bit more transparency and control over their, you know, representatives, people who they voted. And also, let's ignore now government and stuff like that. Big companies, corporation work because Capricorn, you know, is very, very linked to a career or institutions which enable career? Well, on one hand, inside certain companies, this is where the aggressive boss, the bad manager, the unfair manager, where there were discriminations, etc., 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 within the company, but more or less abuse from bosses and authoritarian figures. Starting from 2008, there was almost like a war declared on that. This is where if a boss did something wrong, well, chances are they were sued the next week or next day, or they had to answer for this. Now, of course, the positive side is where this was very much needed, because the abuse and the unfairness and the injustice and all of that in big companies and corporations and work and stuff like that was really out of hand, and it was under the shadow, secret. When you looked at it from the outside, oh, a beautiful company that functions and is productive and it's so disciplined. If you looked at it from the inside, well, it was disciplined because it was slave driven or whatever. So from 2008, this Pluto not only revealed this, but it kind of invited everyone who was affected to take action. So companies changed their HR strategy profoundly. Another example, Sagittarius is also linked to higher education, universities, highly specialized workers or professionals, better said, who have to really, really research and study a domain. So Pluto made higher education much more accessible to everyone. Its effects in Capricorn, there was a tumult of highly skilled professionals. So this really caused a certain kind of chaos. It's almost like when you just put every single washing in the washing machine without having to select it, whites and colors and stuff like that, and just pressing the button, and the end result may be a little bit not so pleasant, where the colors just spread everywhere. Now, that same example happened where it shook the work industry, especially its Capricornian element, so intensely that some people who had a very strong career said, well, I cannot handle this competition because I have a reputation, I have worked so very many years and devoted myself and sacrificed. And now these new people who have no experience, who live a little bit of a professional delusion, come and tell me how to do my job. No, I'm gonna change my job or career or whatever. So this energy happened. So you can see how Pluto changing from one sign onto the other, the next sign, actually takes the energies and the expression of the previous sign into the sign that it enters, because that is the executory part. Now, I'm so sorry for this long theory, and but we need to understand that this is also gonna be the case, because exactly what Pluto highlighted in Capricorn, past, let's say 2 years, but even more, that's gonna be part of Sagittarius. And we must not forget also that the ruling planet of Capricorn, Saturn, 12th of December 2020, took place in what we call the Great Conjunction, the meeting of Jupiter and Saturn at that 0 degrees of Aquarius. So, of course, the ruler of Capricorn, Saturn, preceded Pluto and transited all of its sign. And actually, Saturn co-rules Aquarius as well. So it paved the way for Pluto, along, of course, with Jupiter. But what's even more important, the Great Conjunction happens every 20 years, and it basically is the key tone, like a key opening, the new paradigm. So it kind of sets like a schedule of how the following energies are going to play out and how the either other planets or important points in astrology are going to play out in that sign after. It is like the main tone, the overall tone, the base of everything. So it was really, really important because Pluto's path was paved. And that is exactly what Pluto is doing, taking its energy and walking to that path which was already paved for him by Jupiter and also Saturn. And we must also not forget that, in January 2020, we had the meeting of Pluto, Saturn, Sun, Mercury, and Ceres in Capricorn at that 21, 22 degrees of Capricorn. Now, that was also really important because that transformed in a way all basically the era that we're living already. That was almost like a quantum leap. That was almost like the finality of a certain kind of normality there and then. And we saw that play out on the world stage immediately after that big conjunction. So the world actually changed in feeling, in perception, and in, our place in it, what we feel immediately. So that part of the energy is also very important. Why? Because that big conjunction charged Pluto. That is a radical part of Pluto's momentarily charged, that which it delivers in Aquarius. So this is really important for us to understand what Pluto is preparing to do. Now, on the other hand, even before I get to Pluto in Aquarius, we need to observe that it's not only the sign that Pluto enters in that is going to suffer this intensity or benefit from it, not necessarily suffer, but it's also the opposite sign, the sign that Pluto is opposing. Now, going back to the example of Pluto in the sign of Capricorn is transit, no, I spoke so much about the Capricornian expression, but Cancer, Capricorn's opposite sign, was also deeply affected. Let me just give you I'm not going to philosophize about this, but I'll give you like examples. Family laws and legislation changed radically. Why? Well, Pluto provoked certain social investigations, welfare, stuff like that, where it was no longer acceptable for, Cancer family. The family to put on the Cancer shell, the intimacy, and whatever went on in the heart of the family through closed doors was the business of the family. That kind of radically started changing, maybe not necessarily in highly civilized countries like the United States and United Kingdom, but more like everywhere in the world, where if a child was abused, well, it didn't matter that you had closed doors. Authorities took away the child. But that's the positive example. Greater protection, the state, Capricorn, took the protection of Cancer, family, much, much, much more seriously. The negative effects are, this almost the same coin, but two different sides. This is where children, in that sense, were forced to receive a certain kind of unnatural education, where if a really good-willed parent and someone who knows instinctually, genetically, on a soul level, whatever you want, how to be the best parent ever, could not raise a finger on its own child, because they had to fear that if anyone sees it, or even if they don't see it, the child would be taken away. Would the child joke about this at school? That joke would turn very, very bitter, because the next day social services knocked on the door of the family. So it became highly abusive and unnatural, because you can imagine if a child, I by no means support violence against children, but this, like, let's be honest, a slap on the wrist, how is that's that's necessary? Because every education needs a punitive measure, rules and regulations. Every individual needs to learn, first of all, that we need to respect the laws of physics. That's the first thing. Like don't put your hand in open flame and stuff like that. But at the same time, we also have to respect the rules of each other. But if a child is simply totally alien of what it means to enforce the laws or have consequences for, I don't want to necessarily say naughty action or mistakes, because those of course don't have to be punished. But when a child does something radically evil, like, I mean evil, not mistake, and children can be evil, like, let's agree on this. A soul can come into an incarnation very evil, and it will manifest from the first days. So an evil child must be somehow helped. You know what I mean? Because if that soul, if that child understands that evil is something that cannot be part of the human race, and for reasons why, you give that soul a really big chance to not become that which it could be, potentially, in the bad sense. So you see, Pluto not just influences the sign that it transits, but also the opposite side, both in a dual way, because Pluto is the symbol of power. Pluto brings out the truth, usually the deepest, the darkest truth of anything. Now, Pluto in this sense is a little bit its effect, not its nature, to Uranus, where Uranus also demands this awareness. Just that the Plutonian awareness is not like the rational type, it is any type. You need to be aware of the greatest profundity of a situation. You know what I mean? So, this is what Pluto asks from us, to come with this deep, not just mental, rational, even emotional, but deep soul level awareness, even a touch of philosophical awareness, because it is very, very, very important for us to embrace the power that Pluto ultimately gives us. Now, let me give you the same old example as I used a minute ago. Top-down authority and what the law can do to it. You know what I mean? We live in an age now where we can truly hold certain people accountable for something that they might have done politically or influenced politically. That gives the people a strong power, if you know what I mean. And also, under Pluto transiting the sign of Capricorn, just remember certain dictators fell. I don't want to comment on this further, but Pluto didn't look at if that dictator did a good job or its dictation, its regime is actually keeping balance, and that is the natural vibe of the place. It didn't look at this. It just said you have to fall. And so now finally we can speak a little bit about Pluto in the sign of Aquarius. Now, when Pluto enters into the sign, into a new sign, simply it highlights everything that that sign means in a very, as I said, neutral way. It doesn't really take sides or polarities, but it just dishes out what that sign does, why it is important, both individually and collectively, of course. Now, Aquarius, of course, is our interhuman connections. I spoke about the symbolism of Aquarius, not just at the beginning of this recording, but so very many times, so I'm not going to repeat it. Of course, it's the human collective. It is our higher thinking, our higher perceptions, our basically the biggest potential of what our intelligence can do. It is also everything that has to do with technology, with futurism, moving into the future. It has a lot to do with artificial intelligence, and of course also astrology and predictions, because the modern ruler of Aquarius is none other than Uranus. And this reminds me that perhaps one of those moments when we are going to truly see and feel in a very stark way what Pluto is doing in Aquarius is going to be, in a good couple of years, when Uranus would have moved into the sign of Gemini and will start holding an air trine with Pluto. That is because, on one hand, Uranus loves being in Gemini in an air sign, and on the other hand, it is the ruler of Aquarius. So it is very, very highlighted. But this synergy is already promised to us in the present moment, because Pluto moves into Aquarius on the 21st of January, and Uranus goes direct 6 or 7 days after. So we already know that Uranus is gonna play a very important and key role in Pluto's transit in Aquarius when it gets into position to hold that conversation with Pluto. And what will that represent? Well, I would imagine either the artificial intelligence actually reveals itself for what it is, what it has become by then, because you can imagine that this is where the artificial intelligence is no longer a tool. It is like an active part of Aquarius where we are parents to it. So in 2025 or 6, when the nodes of the moon move into Pisces Virgo axis, we are definitely going to be seeing the effects of that. How the artificial intelligence is actually our child, and how we need to educate it also with things that have to do with morality, spirituality, philosophy, and what ideal and a positive expression of illusion is, Pisces, basically. So what the artificial intelligence is gonna become and what function it's gonna take, that is definitely part of Pluto's transit in Aquarius. But at the same time, it doesn't just refer to the artificial intelligence. It refers to our own innate intelligence, because Pluto in Aquarius is definitely gonna reveal, and maybe this isn't the right word because we're already aware of that. But for those who aren't expressively aware, maybe technologically, maybe something comes out of the result of a scientific research that telepathy is not science fiction, and telepathy is something very common. Maybe we won't, I'm not saying that we're going to become telepaths. I'm saying that in interhuman connections, for example, on one hand, let's agree on the premises that everything is ruled by excessive technology, because Age of Aquarius and Pluto in Aquarius. And in the context of that, let's say there are couples who love each other deeply, people who are very, very physically or whatever attracted to one another, best friends, soulmates, or you deeply loving a group, being connected to a group, family, or what, it doesn't matter. After a while, you will notice the telepathy and the synchronicity and the coincidence at play, where whatever you're thinking, that person who you love and they love you as well. And I'm not speaking about romantic, any kind of love and connection, whatever reason you're connected to that person is, that's fine. Even if it's not like classic love. you're gonna notice the telepathy. You think the same things, you synchronize, you know what that person kind of, I don't want to say is doing, but what state they are in whenever it is that you want to mentally check up on them. So this will really, really reveal that our sixth senses, and this is also what Uranus is doing in the sign of Taurus. Now, everyone speaks about money, well, even including me, of course. Money, values, earthquake, technology with agriculture, planting, genetics, cryptocurrency, etc., etc. And absolutely, but no one actually speaks about the upgrade of the five senses where it's no longer five, it's six. Uranus is showing us that, well, we do have another extra sense, which is not all that fairy tale and fantasy as we might have believed, falsely believed until now. But don't get me wrong, I'm just talking about modern civilization because everyone, let me give you a time frame to be actually correct. Until 1870s, let's say, knew that we had this sense. So that wasn't even a mystery. It was just the aggressive evolution of empirical science that kind of, because how would you believe, how would you prove that in a typical way before this massive technological opening? So of course it was it was placed in the realm of fairy tale, but actually we always had an extra sense or more. But and people were very aware of it. Let me give you an example, and I don't like to talk about myself and my life, but this is the very, very best example. Now, as you know, I live in Romania, and when I was born, Romania was still deeply communist, which means that in most places, not even landline telephone was all that much accessible. But why? Because no one needed it. In the sense that in rural places, people had that sixth sense, but it was a normal, accepted, and used part of their lives. So when I was born, my grandma lived in a rural place and they didn't have telephone or anything. But she knew to the day to come to my mom with flowers and greet her at the hospital because I was born, without communication between them in the past 2 weeks. And this doesn't mean that my grandma was special. Every woman in her village had, that was a norm. They didn't need telephone. They just knew. Like there was a neighbor lady, she didn't have clock, neither watch, neither anything. She closed her eyes and she could always tell the exact time. And these things, they might seem so miraculous and weird or whatever right now, but to them, that was always been like that. You know what I mean? So this is an example that, is it new or is it not new? But anyway, Uranus is really, really upgrading that it's gonna be part of our lives in a very active way, and it's not gonna be any mystery. If you are strongly connected to someone emotionally, mentally, and let's say physically even, of course you have telepathy between the two of you. So this will definitely be part of Pluto's transit and stay and effect in Aquarius, because it will reveal that we, just how very powerfully we can connect to one another. And this is where maybe it ants and bees and other insects and animals who have this very, very powerful interconnectedness, we human beings can have it, maybe not as strongly, but who knows? We have it as well, and we can live that way. We can exist that way. There can be a hive mind that basically delights all of us. And the hive mind is so very, how should I say, relevant to Aquarius, because the glyph of Aquarius, one is the human collective, which does need a hive mind, because otherwise it's not a collective. And there is the individual, which basically represents the primary component of the whole. So, you know what I mean? There has to be a much, much, much stronger interpersonal connection between all of us, because that will represent the power, the unity. If we want technology not to destroy us, basically, and I'm not saying about Terminator and robots turning against us. No, technology, we can destroy ourselves by becoming so lazy, so comfortable, so ignorant, so unhuman that we lose our human spirit. And you can imagine that when that happens, depression, collective depression, mass depression. So kind of, but this isn't anything new. This happened in 1930s, the Great Depression. This happens in cycles. But this cycle of collective depression, if you're not careful, is gonna be like one we never even imagined in our, not even Nostradamus could have imagined anything like, you know what I mean? So that's, but Aquarius, but we have to cope with all of the hard thing Pluto evidences, highlights during its transit by embracing Leo, the opposite sign of Aquarius. Because the heart, true and pure love, and elevated love is I know you're gonna laugh at me, but that is a infinitely greater power than hyper intellect, Aquarius. Leo, the heart space, the sacred passion that basically can even create a totally new love, creates always, and it can create pockets into any main dimension, and in that pocket you're living your love. But imagine if we do this collectively and we compensate Aquarius's hyper intellect. Imagine what is possible when exactly the hyper intellect, the greatest, nuance of our intelligence, meets an equally strong source of love, passion, creativity, and this is the key theme: innocence. You know that Enigma song, Return to Innocence? Now, we will be, in a certain way, almost conditioned to do that, because we won't be able to survive on a heart and soul level in any other way. Especially that Pluto hasn't really entered into Aquarius. Actually, it has in March 2023 for a very brief moment. And that brief moment was enough to basically fill our lives in a very excessive and stressful and almost like dehumanizing way with technology and the illusion that technology creates. So you can imagine that that is going to amplify, get stronger and stronger and stronger. So the heart energy, the innocence, the pure love has to become just as strong in order for us to cope and make the very, very best of Pluto and Aquarius. Because the Pluto and Aquarius, if you look at it in a very, let's say, utopic way, it will give us the power to do anything that we would like. We could, it really, really can take us into infinity. Now, chances are we are not as wise yet, and chances are this won't happen, but that is the ultimate potential there, that Pluto can really open up infinity to us. And this is where Pluto now staying in Anaretic Capricorn, one of the effects that I noticed very, very recently, that a lot of scientific studies, especially cosmology and astronomy, are highlighting the fact that the universe is finite. It's truly finite. It's like a bubble, And there is, in a way, both nothingness beyond that, but that nothingness still leads to another bubble. In theory, the only thing that was proven is the finite, that it's not as infinite as we think, and it doesn't expand infinitely as we have thought collectively before that. But can you imagine the gravity of that? The universe is finite. That goes against anything. But it's wonderful, because if the universe is finite, that means that a greater intelligence is looking after it and expanding it in a very non-chaotic way. What do you mean? What do I mean non-chaotic? Well, in a way where it's organized, where there is a plan, there are patterns, there is a structure, there is an ideal driving it, and each and every day, symbolically, it's a trial and error. So that should really make us feel not alone. And I'm not really saying about extraterrestrials in that sense. I'm saying more about that a divine intelligence is literally guiding us and growing us and evolving us, not just us, but everything that is part of our universe. So that may, if there are extraterrestrials in a classical sense, then they are definitely, we are just brothers or sisters. We're not, there is no alien anymore. You know what I mean? If the universe is finite, erase the word alien, because there is no such thing anymore. You know what I mean? And this is part definitely with Pluto in Aquarius. Now, one thing that I need to really speak about, and I try to evade the negative expressions, but youth, Leo, you know what I mean? Youth, young people, the spirit of youth, the spirit of children, the spirit of innocence, the spirit of play is gonna be suffocated by the excessive thought and intellect energy and the not real energy of Aquarius. So we will immediately see our youth get more and more and more depressed, and their heart space, heart chakra closing. And that will lead, I don't even want to say where it will lead, because there were other phases in humanity's history when we could see that playing out. It wasn't Pluto, it wasn't Aquarius, it was other big planets or negative conversations which deeply targeted Leo, let's say. But we know what it means when exactly the youth, children, and our, again, youth are depressed and are in a very, very bad state. Everyone suffers. There is no future anymore. Aquarius is exactly the future. So the biggest mission in all of our lives, the individual part of Aquarius, is to offer the love. Because the biggest plague that is knocking on our door, humanity's door, and it's nothing new, because as Pluto started moving to that energetic degrees of Capricorn, we could actually not even. When Pluto transited Sagittarius, we could feel that and see that very clearly, that the biggest plague is being unloved. And this is where love is not mental energy. One might live in the illusion that I provide for my child, that I give them everything, I give them cuddles, and that's love. That's not love. Love is not, has nothing to do with that. Love is something that cannot be understood empirically. You don't need to love your child to do all of that for them. Love is an energy. Love is a state of being. Love is pure devotion. Love is when your soul sings continuously to the soul of the other. it is almost like an unending love song that the inner being hears, and the harmonies of that song make one's evolution, growth, and expansion beautiful like a flower opening. Without that song, symbolically, metaphorically speaking, the heart just starves, and the mind will lead that person to do anything basically that looks like love, to try and feed the heart, but without the person ever being aware that what they're looking for, what they want, what they're seeking, why they're striving for, what they're suffering from, is exactly the lack of love. You know what I mean? It will be totally alien to them, this thought, because they never ever even learned what love is. You know what I mean? So this is why it is all of our duties to give as much love to everyone, but especially the youth, as we can. Because if not, you can imagine where they will seek love in an illusionary way, but substances. But I'm not speaking about minor substances. I'm speaking about where virtual reality, which is wonderful, beautiful, fine, but to a certain measure. There are going to be people who are going to be married, have love lives, or any lives just in virtual reality. For the universe, that works. For the universe doesn't care that it's not real. It works. It absolutely works. No problem at all. It is allowed. But who's running the program? You know what I mean? We can give the impression of a totally different reality that is within our power. That's fine. But the problem is we don't know how to orchestrate it for the individual to actually receive the important lessons and teachings, what the adventure of life is. Because this is the other effect of the age, the negative effect of the age of Pluto in Aquarius, better said, that life will no longer have the magic of life in it. You know what I mean? We will just exist as a program, as a simple identity, as a non-artificial intelligence. But just that's what you will be. Just an intelligence and nothing else. So in order for this not to happen, we really, really need to embrace the magic of being alive and living it. And that magic can only be experienced when there is sufficient love, sufficient childlike energy in the world. So we need children. We need children's energy to fill our reality, to fill our invisible matrix with the playfulness, with the fantasy, with the magic. And it is children who can instinctually, automatically, in a 1,000,000% guaranteed way, they can summon the divine within into our plane automatically. Because every child's real parent is the divine. You know what I mean? The main parent is actually the divine, and the real parent through the divine. But anyway, this is where we really, really need to add all of this to the table. So we have our jobs cut out, and it's going to be very, very intense. And even if you find this ridiculous, but that is what we will need to do. Bring as much love and sacred, innocent passion to generate it as much as we can, because that is the food that children and the youth actually need. That is what's going to nurture them. It is almost like a beehive when there's no honey. Everyone starves. We need to produce the honey. And the most highly specialized ancient souls need to produce the royal jelly, symbolically speaking. But we do need to do all of this. So I'm gonna leave it at this. I really hope that this was helpful and useful Perhaps not in a predictive sense, not in a classic astrological sense, but in a sense where you can much better use your intuition to interpret these Aquarian energies and to understand how Pluto works. So thank you everyone for listening. And again, thank you so much everyone for commenting and requesting this video. And until next time, bye for now.